Welcome to the Acts 29 podcast. Acts 29 is an organization and global network of churches that exist to plant churches worldwide. Now here's your host, Vice President of Acts 29 Church Planting, Dr. Adam Flint.
All right. Well, Jim Sheppard, welcome to the Acts 29 podcast.
Good to be here. Thanks,
Yeah.
Adam. It's an honor, brother.
So, Jim, you are the chairman and principal of Generis. It's a couple big titles.
That and 25 cents will get you something down the road. I don't know what it'll get you, but you'll need the 25 cents, Yeah. Been here, crazy thing, bro. I was just been minding my own business as a finance guy, and God just rudely interrupted my life in late 1991. Actually thought I was called to be a pastor, and then realized that wasn't what I was supposed to do. 6 months later, my job, public company, senior vice president, CFO, got bought out, and they moved my job to New York City, so I was out.
Yep.
And I spent that summer trying to figure out what I was going to do. Started doing this. I was consultant number 4 at this company. Honestly, Adam, I thought I'd do this for 4 or 5 years and then maybe go back to the marketplace, but that was never what happened. And so all these years later, this is actually what God spoke to me about at the altar. It wasn't about going to be a pastor. It was about letting go of the business world and coming over to do this.
Yeah.
Using kind of my business background. I got saved as an adult, 28 years old, so I became a Christ follower, and 2 years later started becoming a generous Christ follower. So God had been writing 2 stories, business and generosity and stewardship in my life, and this became the intersection of the two.
So our church has been partnered up with Generis for years, and I know a bunch of churches in Acts 29 have, but for folks that don't know, talk a little bit about what Generis is, what you guys do, maybe what people think you do and what you really do, because those aren't always the same thing.
Aren't always the same. Aren't always the same.
Yeah.
So we've been around 35 and a half years now. We celebrated our 35th anniversary last year. Had a lot of fun doing that throughout the year. We started in 1989, and, back then we were just primarily known as a capital campaign firm.
Yep.
It is still kind of our bread and butter. That is what we do, but we do a lot more than that nowadays. We've branched off into the nonprofit world with our advancement division. I'd say giving development, if I had to just put one big name around it, in the name of discipleship in a local church.
Yeah.
And from a kingdom perspective, when we're in advancement world, right? So we do that. But what's not written anywhere, everybody in here knows it. We're at the Generis.
Yeah, that's right.
office
We're
here
sitting in the
today.
headquarters in Atlanta.
Everybody here knows that the vision of what we're trying to accomplish here is that we want to change the conversation about faith and money in the American church. That it's become what God intended to be transformational has become way too transactional, and we want to change that conversation. So what people think we are is a consulting firm, and we are.
Right.
But that allows us to come in and then begin to help you change the conversation about faith and money and giving in your church.
Right. Yeah.
So that was a good question. We're kind of got a stealth move. Yeah. A little bit of a Trojan horse.
That's maybe. Right. Yeah. Well, let's, I want to ask you, because you see a bunch of churches, all over the place. I mean, you guys, 35 years of working with churches. And when you start dealing with churches and money, you really get to see a picture of what's going on. You guys work with different size churches, different denominations, different ages, style, everything. And so what are some of the things that you're seeing in kind of the broader church world that maybe your insight into, maybe the in is through the financial side of it, but you really get a bigger picture and you can start to go, I'm seeing this.
Yeah. Several things. First of all, one of the things that's really clear for me after 32 plus years of doing this myself is that when you run a giving initiative, it's like putting your church through the x-ray machine, maybe even getting an MRI, right? All of the good stuff will be identified and all the not so good stuff will be identified. So we've had over the years churches that outwardly would seem like, oh man, they got it going on.
Right.
And then we run an initiative and it's like, oh, wait, that didn't go the way it was supposed to. Because it's not as much that the traction between them and the people is not really what you think it is.
Yep.
Getting spectators in church is not hard, Adam. You know that.
Right.
I mean, that's not, we're not breaking any news.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
making disciples and getting them formed and fruitful is a much more challenging issue.
Right.
So what I say in terms of money is raising money is not hard.
Yep.
I can go into a group of people with a compelling case, with the right amount of wow and the right amount of now, the compelling and urgent.
Yep.
And a couple of emotional hooks in there, and I can raise money for almost anything. And you can too. This
Sure.
is not about me.
Right.
Anybody can
Right.
do this. But changing givers' hearts is really hard, and that's what we're trying to do. And so the churches that seem to be approaching this, and some of them are doing it without our help, so we don't claim that we're doing with all of them, but the ones that are grasping this idea that it is about changed hearts, not about financial transactions, are seeing more success than those that are trying to the transactional route, right?
Yeah.
Younger families are givers, and that's counterintuitive.
I was going to say, most people would tell you, like, age, stage, of a person,
Mm-hmm.
they don't have disposable income, they're not going to give, and just as time and culture has moved on, that's not the case.
Yeah.
But you're saying that's not a true narrative.
That's not a true narrative. And so, one of the things, that I do is I spend a lot of time around younger leaders, mentoring them and speaking into their lives and helping them figure out, their stuff. My whole thing is I want you to be a better 30-year-old than I was, because I was a full-blown idiot.
Don't we all?
The bar's pretty low, but I do want to help them be better, right? And I love, as part of my passing the baton, making sure that my influence lives on beyond me. So I've known anecdotally for a while that younger people are givers.
Yeah.
But then we were a part of the Barna State of the Church generosity study. And there's 2 slides in there that are very, very telling. One slide, and when you isolate, of course, they can subdivide it anywhere.
Sure.
I like to look generationally. So I'm looking at millennials, Gen X, and boomers. I'm taking out the seniors and Gen Z because they're different.
Right.
These 3 have enough commonality. So when you ask the question, who gives of any kind to a church or nonprofit, it's pretty high. It's not within the margin of error for all 3 groups, which is interesting, right? It's within the margin of error. But then when you ask, and the older people, my generation would say, oh, Jim, I know they give. They just don't give to a church. They give to all these nonprofits and all these other things that they're involved in.
Right.
Well, then hold on, Pastor. Then let's look at this next slide. And so what you see on the next slide is who gives to a church. Mm-hmm. Now we've got it zeroed in, right?
Right.
And so when you look at millennials and Gen X and boomers and Gen X are within the margin of error. So they're pretty close.
Yep.
At about 33 and 35%. The margin of error is 3%, so they're right there inside of it. But boomers are 33%, millennials 41%.
Really?
41%. So that's not even within the margin of error. If I take the 41 down to 38 and take the 33 up to 36, you're still
there.
Okay.
Yeah.
So then someone would say, a boomer person would say, yeah, but they don't give as much as we do. I was like, bro, you didn't have any money when you were 28, so shut up. Would you shut up?
Right.
Their propensity to give is as big as, if not bigger than yours. Their giving will grow as their lifestyle evolves.
Sure. Yeah.
But they're giving, well, they're not giving in my church. Hold on. Well, then that's maybe not a generational problem.
That might be a you problem.
That's a you problem,
That's right.
baby. That's what we're talking
Well,
about.
and, to those statistics, if you look at what's happening, there's recently, the last few weeks, maybe this will be a month or two when this comes out, last few months, the studies of what's going on among millennials and Zs, just spiritually, is so encouraging. They are,
it's crazy.
And what's going on among young men spiritually and all that is so encouraging. And so if somebody goes, well, yeah, but what you're saying seems to line up with some of the other data of what the Spirit's doing in younger people.
And Adam, I was seeing it in the rooms that I'm in. I'm fortunate, man. I get to sit in the rooms with some of the most amazing up and coming men and women.
Okay.
A lot of them I end up mentoring for a little while. Some of them end up mentoring for over a long period of time. And so I knew what I was seeing. They're talking about being involved and they're starting these nonprofits and then they're talking about how much they love their church.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And the narrative out there in public is they love the nonprofit more than they love their church. And what I was seeing was, no, that's not the case. The nonprofit is actually the fruit of how much they love their church and how they can serve over here.
Right.
And I was in these rooms and I was watching the worship happening and everything that was happening. And I was listening to the stories around the table. And I was like, that is not what you're reading in the mainstream press.
Yeah.
That's not what you're reading.
Yeah.
Right. It's kind of like That's one of my favorite stories in Numbers, because my dad used to tell me about this. So, the 12 were sent out, and 2 believed one version, and 10 believed the other. So I'm like, y'all 10 are believing some other narrative. I'm part of the 2. I've seen the other narrative.
Yeah.
And I know what I saw.
Yeah.
And so when the research came out, I mean, the Barna people and the Glue people who did that together, we were sitting around a table. There was about 8 of us, and they were asking, what stood out to you? I said, those 2 slides right there.
Yeah.
I said, it's not that I didn't know that. It proved what I know I've been seeing. Right? I mean, the article today comes out. Bible sales in the United States have spiked because of Gen Z.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Gen Z.
Yeah.
Specifically noted Gen Z.
Yeah.
Well, here's what I know, bro. I came back. This was in January of 2020. January 2020, right before the pandemic came out. So I've been at a gathering of young leaders. And there was a young woman there who was 18 years old at the time. I'm not going to call her name, but a lot of people would know her. When I say it, I'm going to say like, hey, I think I know who that is. She was from Minnesota, and she was in a Reformed church. Okay. And she was 18 years old, and she did the devotional after lunch. She had her Bible open, and she said, we don't need sound, and we don't need lights, and we don't need this, and we just need the Word of God. And she was just going through it. I told my wife that night, I said, she said, how was the day? And I said, honey, I've had so much time, such a good time. This is so life-giving to be around these young folks. And I said, but hey, I got a revelation for you. I think I figured out who I want to be like when I grow up. She's like, hey, so you're in your 60s. You need to be figuring this out. Right?
Yeah.
I was like, So she said, who is it? And I said, an 18-year-old girl from Minnesota.
For sure. I have
she tore it up. She tore it up, Adam.
Yeah. I've got a daughter that's a freshman in college, and it has been so encouraging to watch. I mean, what's going on in her life, I feel that way. Like, man, I wish I had done college the way she's doing college. But then to just see what the Lord is doing on college campuses, and it's not just like a Southeast thing in the United States. I mean, this is happening all over among that generation. And so, I love that. I love what you're...
And watching what's happening with the Unite Us movement, Tanya Pruitt and Jenny Allen and JP, Jonathan Pruitt, my friend JP.
Well, that's my daughter was at one of those events.
It's crazy.
They're baptizing people in the back of a pickup truck.
That's what we did at Georgia.
Yeah.
So bro, as a University of Georgia graduate, nothing says baptism at the University of Georgia like putting plastic bags in the back of a truck and baptizing.
I'm a UF. I mean, not that it's competition, but we'd have to compare baptism numbers, But,
bro, they had people from Auburn getting saved.
Then the Lord has worked.
The Lord has come.
Salvation does belong to Him.
Salvation does belong to Him. The other thing is, I think, Adam, is that in terms of giving in America, healthy churches are seeing giving growth.
Yeah.
And we can have a whole nother episode about what healthy church is, but let's just leave that there for a second.
Sure.
If you'll focus on church health, a lot of the giving stuff will take care of itself.
Right.
Their confidence in you, their confidence in what God is doing in and through the church. And most of those healthy churches are not approaching it as pretty purely transactional.
Right.
They're saying like, hey, what the Apostle Paul said in Philippians 4:17, I'm glad you gave to this little 501c3 I had going over here. But what I got stoked about was what happened to you when you made that gift. That was a bigger deal than the money you gave. Right?
Yep.
I think the churches that are healthy and are pursuing that of all sizes and all denominations are seeing that work for them right now. Yeah. And the economy, come on, man. The economy is an issue, but it's not an issue. Because here's the thing. Inside of you show me 2008, 2009, you show me the pandemic, which are probably the 2 biggest fluctuations we've seen in our generation. A third of the churches went up, a third of them stayed flat, and a third of them went down. Now, it may not have been the same third, but the healthy ones, the economic risk to your church is not out there. It's inside.
Yeah.
If your pastor goes down, let's just not say a moral failure. Let's just say burnout.
Yeah.
Burnout. I know a guy who's sitting on the sidelines right now. Burnout. No integrity issues. Nothing moral. Just burned out.
Right.
It's going to hurt.
Yeah.
It's going to hurt. It's going to be a problem. Right? And you worry about the economy, and the bigger risk is, which is why I say, if your board or your elders are starting off your meeting and the first question is not, Pastor, how are you doing?
That's right.
Yeah. You're way off base, man, because those financial statements don't matter. Not at the end of the day. Yeah. And I'm a financial guy.
Yeah, right.
So, so that's kind of a snapshot of what I think I'm seeing out there.
So let's take that kind of second idea and and play it out with churches and church planting and all this. So Jesus says in Matthew 6:21, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also.
Yeah.
And I think at least part of that is to say, hey, this is a discipleship issue. Money's not just, like you said, not just transactional. It's transformational.
Yeah.
And God designed it to operate that way in our life. And we know it. Like, you know, if you pay tuition to a certain university, all of a sudden you're rooting for that. You know, we were joking. My dad went to Tennessee and I went to Florida. All of a sudden he's got orange and blue on. The correct orange, you know.
Exactly.
So,
Exactly.
you know, so talk a little bit about that idea of not just rule number one of podcasting, turn your phone off.
That the record shows
that's
you
right.
did that I did.
That's right. Yeah, it's my brother trying to call me.
He'll
Probably
call
trying
back
to
later.
raise
He'll
money
call
for
back
his
later.
church plant. So, you know,
Ironically.
no. Yeah. So talk to me about what that looks like in your congregation to approach finances, giving from a discipleship perspective. Like, I care about your heart more than I care about getting dollars out of you.
Yeah. Yeah. So I just need to say to everyone who's watching, listening,
Yeah.
stay with me because you're probably not going to like where I start here. I just wonder, Adam, if we've got it right in the churches where so many of us, I'm not pointing fingers at one, I'm just saying so many of us start with trying to get you to serve in the hope that you'll give.
Okay. Right.
Because that seems to fly in the face of what we see here. Isn't it, if I can get you to give, then you'll serve?
Yeah.
Your treasure, once your treasure is here, then your heart's going to be here, and it changes everything. And it changes everything. And I'm not saying go overturn your systems and everything
Sure.
and do
Yeah.
it differently, but I'm just
It's
saying,
not an either or thing. It's just
rethink.
right.
Just
Right.
rethink,
Yeah.
right? Because at the end of the day, as much as I want you to serve, and that's the time and talent piece, which is not the main teaching of Scripture when it comes to stewardship. It's financial.
Right.
It's financial because Jesus defined it as a spiritual threat to your life. No one. Think about this. Think about this, Adam. Let's go down this sideline just a second because I think it reinforces all of this. There's one thing in Scripture that Jesus said, two places, the exact same words. Two places, completely different places. Luke 16, the parable of the shrewd servant,
Manager, yeah.
and then Matthew 6:24. No one. Now, when Jesus says no one,
Okay.
in the words
No one. Yeah.
of our founding pastor,
Yeah.
when he says no one, I think that means there are no exceptions.
Right.
No one.
Right.
And that means no one before me or after me until I return again. No one can serve even two masters, not three or four.
Right.
Two.
Right.
Two. And you're waiting for what he says the other one is. Oh, wait, is it drugs or gambling or pride or lust? I mean, what is the other one?
Right.
What is it? No one. You can't serve both God and, I'm going to use mammon because that's the word that we need.
Yeah.
And so it's not only that he said the exact same thing in two completely different contexts. This is not two gospel writers seeing the same thing.
Right.
This is two completely different stories.
Yep.
Most people know it's in Matthew 6:24. They forget it's in the parable of the shrewd servant. Because he says it right there at the end. And it's the only place where he used a deistic term with anything other than himself, the Father, or the Holy Spirit.
Yeah.
So he has assigned a godlike quality to money.
Right. That's right. That
And he
mammon word.
said-
Yeah.
And so you can't worship. So you'll you can't worship two. You're either going to worship at the altar of the one true God, or you're going to worship at the altar of mammon. That's as clear as you can make it.
Right.
That's as clear as you can make it. That is a spiritual threat. This thing that you have that you think is just your friend in your pocket, it is that.
Right.
But if it goes too far, it can actually own your life and take you in the wrong direction and threaten you spiritually. Which is why when I talk about, I don't do this often. I generally only do it for church plants. I figure established churches, you got somebody who can teach on this topic. You don't need me.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to be your homeboy to come in and say what you're not willing to say.
Right.
The guy from out of town. I'm going to bring that expert from out of town in. He's going to tell you.
Yeah, there's a fear issue now we have to deal with.
I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that. But in a church plant, they'll say to me, like, it happened a year ago, November. Guy comes up to me down in Tampa. After I'd preached there, he said, hey, so I love what you said today, but hey, at the end of the day, you're always waiting for the but, right? The guy who comes up and the but.
Yeah.
But you only talked about financial stewardship. There's other kinds, isn't it? Right? And time and talent and all that. It's like, yeah, there is. The bubble above my head is saying, hey, nobody who's a faithful giver to a church asked me this question.
That's right. That's right.
I didn't say that.
Right.
I'm thinking,
yeah.
I'm a guest. Yeah. Be kind.
Yeah.
Be kind.
Faithful givers don't care if you know what they give. They don't. You know what I mean? It's like, sure, I'll give you my giving statement. Whatever. Here, take it.
And I said, here's why I don't do that. Because it's the only one that Jesus defined as a spiritual stronghold in your life is the financial one. And my experience is the people that figure that out get the other part figured out, and the reverse is not always true.
Yeah.
Right? And so the idea of treasure and heart being in the same place.
Yeah.
Right? I early on, I heard a pastor setting up a sermon, and he set it up, and he started with this. He says, nobody ever washes a rental car.
Yeah.
You don't have any treasure in that.
Right.
I mean, now, your own car you might keep fairly clean. If you got teenage kids, that's a relative term.
Sure.
But he said, but you're not going to do that. And I was like, that's exactly right.
Yeah.
Where you put some money into something, your heart's going to be there one way or the other. And that's I just wonder if we need to start rethinking in the church. I'm not opposed to getting people on a serve team, a volunteer team doing this.
Sure.
I want you to do that.
Yeah.
But what if we started with giving and then watch it?
Yeah.
We actually have a client in Canada who's running our Generosity 360 motion, our new motion that is giving development for churches that don't need campaigns, right?
Yep.
He actually said to us, he said, giving went up, but let me tell you what else went up. And it was serving and volunteering. Right. So he actually did it. They were focusing on the giving piece, and serving and volunteering went up without him saying a word about it.
Well, and we've experienced that, like, giving to those nonprofit things is not a threat to the giving in the church. In fact, we did a huge Compassion Sunday the weekend before we did like our big give weekend, and it had zero effect negatively at all. Yeah. And it was the biggest Compassion Sunday that had ever happened. Yeah. And then the other thing about this discipleship thing is, I remember when it clicked for me, the uniqueness of giving to the church. And the church is the one place where I give and I don't control at all where the money goes.
None.
Like, if everywhere else, it may be good. I'm not saying it's bad, but I like that, and therefore I give to it. And this sounds real crass, but I'm sort of buying a slice of the pie that I like.
Yeah,
but at the church, what I do is I lay it down before God and say, the elders, you direct it. And then I take my hands off of it. And it is the one place that I get to trust God like no other place.
That's well said.
And it's a discipleship thing more than just a giving, giving piece in there.
That. I don't get to control it.
Right.
Well, I know a few people that could learn that.
Which is why, I mean, I know we having designated giving and all that. And I'm just such a big fan of just have one pot, put it all in there, one fund, and then trust the men that God has appointed to lead that church, to direct that. And
I think the thing is, your church and my church, we both have churches that are involved in so many things. That it's like we're investing in a mutual fund of kingdom opportunities, right? And then if you want to go out and buy some common stocks to supplement that, right? So if I want to go out and I want to buy a little bit more international justice, then I go find something to do that. If I want to go buy a little more church planting, I invest directly into some church plants. You see what I'm saying? I think most people don't think about that. We're in churches that we can actually trust that they're going to do the things with my money that I want to do with my money. Because we've got all these opportunities, and then go supplement that as you need to. But you got to let go of it, man. Because there are people that God has placed in charge who are trustworthy, godly men and women, if your policy includes that, who can oversee this, and you don't have to do that.
So I mean, money is primarily a discipleship issue, and so if you're shepherding, whether it's a brand new church, a core team just launched, has been around for 20 years, 50 years. I mean, you're shepherding these people.
Yeah.
And to not talk about money is, in some sense, pastoral negligence. Because if was what Jesus said was true in that Matthew 6 and Luke 16, which we believe it is, then to not talk about money with your people, and not just what they give, but how they steward all of their life and all of their resources.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the predominant, conversation in America is no conversation.
Right.
We're not talking about, we have this problem,
Right.
but we're not talking about it. It has its roots, I think, Adam, just Jim's theory.
Yeah.
In the seeker movement that started in the 80s, where we had welcome as our big issue for people who were not in the church, and let's have church for people who don't like church.
Yep.
But what we did, the unintended consequence, nobody intended for it to happen.
Right.
We took our eye off the discipleship ball, and that it shows itself in the money conversation. I believe, this is Jim, I believe most of the pushback we get from congregations is not that we talk about money, but that we talk about money incorrectly. We talk about it as a financial issue and not as a spiritual issue. And now there seems to be an agenda. Oh, Pastor, you got an agenda there. I see what you did there. Right.
Right.
Or, the popular way of saying it, I don't know who said it first, it's probably Hybels Warren or somebody, back at or Groeschel.
Yeah, right.
The three of them.
Yeah.
Or failing that, John Maxwell said it, somebody.
Yeah.
It's not what we want from you, it's what we want for you, which is exactly what Paul was saying in Philippians 4:17. I sought not to give from my own account, but for the increase that comes to your account.
Right.
They'll do that. They'll say that, but everything else looks like it really is about the money. And that makes it even worse, because now you're double talking. You're saying it's not what I want from you.
Yeah.
But it really is. Because if I don't balance the budget, if I don't fund this project, if I don't get this done, that's a problem.
Right.
That's a bigger problem than if you're not prospering spiritually.
Yeah.
And nobody intends that.
Right.
But that's the way it plays out.
And
we probably lost everybody.
No. But I mean, and I've noticed in my life and pastoring, the times when I don't want to talk about it at all, or I just want to keep it at a financial level, this is hard to say. It's fear.
Oh, God.
It's fear of man. And to go, well, if I talk about this, are they going to leave? And them leaving, what I'm really concerned about is how does that reflect on me or my dream or this thing? You know what I mean? And so,
get around it.
And so to not talk about it or to keep it at that financial level, the pastor has to deal with their own heart and fear issues and pride issues and, inadequacies or whatever those things are, and get over that and to go, hey, I don't really care what anybody thinks of me. I just really care about your relationship with Christ.
Perfect. Exactly.
And this thing matters big time.
Yeah.
Your relationship.
We did one of the podcast episodes we just recorded in the last couple of days was, it's not the majority of the church, but there's enough of it out there that we had to speak to it. What about the pastor who comes out of seminary with this millstone of student debt, who's now looking at his own financial life and doesn't feel like he even has the moral authority to stand in front of his people?
Right.
And we tried to walk them through a framework to say, hey, look, you're probably not the best prayer in your congregation. You preach on that. So why are we letting you stand in the way on giving? And your growth in that area can actually be where you show your leadership in that area. Right.
Well, it's why a young guy can preach on marriage or preach Ephesians 5 and not just preach the man side of it, but the female side. Because I'm not standing on my experience and my authority. I'm standing on the authority of the Word of God.
Totally.
In that thing.
Totally.
So, okay. So there's the discipleship side of it with your people, but there is, let's talk about church plants for a minute. Like, let's talk about the guy that's, maybe they've got a launch date in sight, or he's starting to gather a core group, a launch team, and they're getting ready and they're doing all the things to get there, or they're just in those early days, long before self-sufficient. There still needs to be an element of that discipling because you are pastoring those people. But there is also a fundraising side to this, like going to other churches. That's why I love Acts 29. There's 1,000 churches that have committed to give to church planting.
Love that.
I mean, we did some work on this, Jim. I don't know if you know this. So every Acts 29 church commits 10% of their annual budget, internal giving. 2% goes to the network, 8% they control, but it goes to church planting. Because we know what the 2% is, we know what the 8% is. It's, us finance guys can do big math.
We can
we can do big math. But that's $16 million a year.
Wow.
Already committed every year, a new $16 million. Wow. But those guys need to, it's there, it's committed. Those church planners just need to go get it and ask for it. And that's fundraising.
Yep.
Like, if you come and ask me or my church for money, I don't need you discipling me necessarily. I've got a pastor and I've got elders. They're discipling me. Just ask me. You know what I mean?
That's right.
So talk about what you see, maybe how you coach church planners in that fundraising side of it.
Yeah. So the place I start is, and some of them are better screened than others. I know when I'm dealing with an Acts 29 person, they've been screened pretty carefully.
Yeah.
Some of the others, but there are some places where they haven't been screened as carefully. I'm not criticizing that. I'm just saying it's reality. So with everybody, my first step, Adam, is I want them to sit down and talk to me about their call as a church planter. I mean, not your call as a pastor.
Right.
But talk to me about this call to be a church planter. All these years later, I think there's only 2 reasons why you would be a church planter. One of them is that you have been called by God. The other one is you've gone crazy.
I was going to say you're not.
Ever-loving mind.
That's right.
Right?
Yep.
And here's why that's important. Because if you're called by God, then God's on the hook to provide the resources. Not you, not me.
Right.
Not you. Now, there's a process.
Right. Yeah.
But I want to make sure that I'm not in putting myself in a situation where you got to strive and find something that God's not even called you to.
Sure.
So I start there. And pretty much.
And wouldn't it be good if God didn't call you to this thing?
Yeah.
To not fund something that he hasn't called you to.
Exactly. And let's find that out.
Yeah, let's get it early and move you back
right?
into the lane he has for you.
Totally.
Different conversation. But
different.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. I had one of those. I was like, I went away and he said he was called, but I didn't think so, and it didn't work out.
Yeah.
So we start there. But then the second thing is for them to understand, here's what happens. Here's financial reality. Being a former CPA and a former CFO, I'm going to say, well, show me your financial plan. There's calling, and then there's vision, there's your story of how God got you here.
Right.
And then there's the vision that you believe God's given you for the church that you're going to plant.
That's right.
So those 3 kind of start. But then the fourth piece of that framework is, hey, show me your financial plan. The characteristic of almost everyone that I've seen to date is that they underestimate expenses and overestimate income.
Totally.
Right? So they've got it showing a surplus.
Yeah.
And I was like, dude, that's amazing. That is amazing. Yeah. And then I say, hey, so have you thought about so-and-so? Well, no. I said, well, that's a budget line item. Well, have you thought about so-and-so?
Right.
Well, that's a budget line item. And so we get that. So the budget the number keeps creeping up. And then we start talking about the income. Hey, so walk me through how you came up with these numbers. Well, where's that so-and-so and per week and this and that and the other. And I was like, hey, wait a second. Didn't you tell me the vision for your church is that you're going to reach unchurched people? He said, well, yeah, that's what we think God's called us to do. And I was like, bro, you're using numbers for church people.
Right.
And I don't think even that's going to work. And unchurched people. So I said, we need to take your income down. Well, now, just in a span of 15 minutes, he's gone from surplus to deficit.
Yeah.
And then he looks at me and says, where's that money coming from? Glad you asked.
Right.
That's step 5.
Right.
Let's develop a list of everyone that you know that might, and I usually use the word invest.
Yes.
It's giving, but it's investing.
That's right. That's right.
Because you're not going to be trying to disciple these external donors. You're asking them to invest in something that God's called you to do.
Yeah.
And so what I typically say, Adam, is that all of your pre-launch expenses have to be funded 100%. You don't have a congregation.
Right.
And in year 1, let's not count on anything more than 25% of your first year needs coming from your congregation. So that means 100% of pre-launch and 75% of year 1 needs to come from external investors.
Yep.
Let's go find them. Yep. Right. And so the extra said, oh yeah, I got plenty of friends and plenty of, it's like, okay, how many do you think you got? And they'll give me a number.
Yeah.
And then they said, well, here's what we're going to do. We're going to put them all into an Excel spreadsheet because I love anecdotal.
Yeah.
But I'm about specifics.
That's
bro.
right. Yeah. Feelings and
sudden-
facts can
all of
be
a sudden-
real far apart.
And they are typically. So here's the next reality.
Yeah.
The
And in
number-
money, facts don't.
number facts,
They'll lie.
money facts
That's right.
are off. Then I say, how many friends and family? Oh, probably 250 or more. And then the Excel spreadsheet comes and it's 181.
Yeah.
Okay, well, at least we're dealing with reality now.
Yep.
And so that's what we deal with and then I teach them how to go and make the presentation.
Yeah.
Right? You're not going to go tell a long story, bro. You got to have a short story. It's got to be an elevator.
Yeah, that
pitch.
elevator. That's what I tell guys. You need
Front
an
and back.
elevator. Yep.
Front and back of one
Yep.
page. That's your leave behind piece. That's your notes you're going to talk through. If they want to know more, you have the expanded version in your briefcase, but only if they ask for it.
Yeah.
Bankers, engineers
Yeah.
want to know more
Right.
information. I can say
Right.
CPAs
Yeah.
want more information. Everybody else doesn't care about that stuff. And so we walk through all of that, and then we move over to this. Okay, now so my model of coaching a planter is 2 years. 9 months is zeroed in on fundraising.
Yeah.
9 months before your launch date, zeroed in on fundraising. 3 months before you launch, I either want us there or we've got pretty good confidence that we're going to get to that number.
Yep.
And then the 3 months before.
And when you say there, do you mean like committed giving that may be coming in over a
Committed
period of
and/or
time?
cash, yeah.
Not.
Yeah.
So it isn't like all cash on
Correct.
hand. It's
Correct.
some combination of that
Some
stuff.
combination.
Okay.
So
Yep.
if most of the churches, not in big cities, most of the churches that I've been coaching recently, Adam,
Yeah.
their first and second year net number that they need outside is around $600,000 to $700,000.
Okay. I was going to ask you.
Around $600,000 to $700,000. So what I'm looking for in like 3 months beforehand, do we have line of sight to $600,000 in cash and commitments?
So you're seeing 600 to 700 over 2 years.
External
Giving
right.
over 2 years.
Right. So what I generally do, I work on a 4-year cycle, 1 year of pre-launch, year 1, year 2, year 3, self-sufficient.
Right.
So
Yep.
initially what I did was I was trying to get all 4 years raised at one time. Well, that doesn't work. Silicon Valley doesn't do that. There's a round A and round B.
round A, yep.
So the nice thing is round B is you've already told them, hey, Adam, I'm going to come back to you. Once we get this thing up and running, year 3 and 4, we'll have line of sight to what we need. It typically is half as much as years 1 and 2.
Yeah.
Whatever that is, it's typically about half.
Sure.
In this case, if you do the numbers, let's say it's 675 and 325, we're talking about $1 million.
Yeah.
Outside investment.
Yeah.
Right. And if somebody's scared by those numbers, I'm like, this is not lap of luxury. This is just what it takes.
Yeah. I think
What
we
it
should
takes.
just stop for a second on that because I think that's a reality check for a lot of guys.
It is a lot of check. Yeah,
I think, either they don't know how to raise that kind of money or that they've never seen that kind of money or whatever it is. And so a lot of times guys will go, well, maybe I just need 200,000. I'm in a little town or they try to hedge against things. And I'm like you, you need to be thinking way bigger. So that $1 million I think is important to say, yeah, year 0 out to year 4 is going to cost you externally.
Yeah.
About $1 million in fundraising.
Yeah. If you're in a small town, it might be 800,000, 750. Right. But if you're in Chicago, New York, LA, it's probably 2 million.
Right.
It's probably double that.
Yeah.
It's just going to take that,
yeah.
right?
So $1 million is sort of like cost of living is 0.
That's kind of our baseline.
Yeah, baseline. And then you fluctuate up and down a little bit from there.
And so, what are some of the reactions I get when I teach this? Hey, well, Jim, it doesn't feel like you're trusting God. Oh, I'm trusting God 100%. Because if you don't trust God, you're not going to get that $1 million. God's got to provide the people who are going to do that for you, right?
Yeah.
He's got to provide the people who are going to do it. So this is not about not trusting God. This is about making sure that you are capitalized at a level that is likely to produce success for you.
Right.
Right? You wouldn't open a restaurant and not be well capitalized.
Well, Jesus says this, right? You got to count the cost of ministry.
Count the cost.
It's not wise. It's not good stewardship to just spend, go. And if you think there are people that are committing to being led by you as their pastor in this church plant, don't they deserve to have had a group of people count the cost so that you don't end up 6 months later folding a thing purely because you just didn't do the money work.
Yeah, yeah. And that's
on it.
What I do is when I lead a session at Exponential, when I'm talking about pre-launch and getting your fundraising done for pre-launch and all that, I'll start off with a story. And I was like, hey, anybody ever been in a situation where there's a new restaurant open, kind of not a chain, but a mom and pop, locally owned, and it opened up and you're like, oh man, that place is really good, but there's not enough customers in there.
Yeah.
And then you go back and, you're like, hey, it was good food, good service, went back and there was a few more customers. And then you went back like the fourth or fifth time, closed.
Yeah.
Closed. Not a bad restaurant, because bad restaurants close for the same reason that bad church plants closed. They're just not good.
Yeah, not good.
But
Don't
a good
go there.
one.
Right. They just didn't have a long enough
They
timeline.
didn't have a long enough timeline, a long enough time horizon to be able to stand up while the customer base was building. That's all you're doing. We're doing for you is we're trying to give you the capital you need to attract unchurched people without feeling pressure to hit them up for money. Right. That transactional thing, we're trying to keep that out of play.
Right.
Right.
Yep.
And we're trying to keep that out so that you can do what God's called you to do. I have a guy. He's going to laugh. He'll probably listen to this. And I have a guy. He launched in September 2020 because he just felt like, and our fundraising had been happening. And I asked him in the spring of that year, do you still feel like that? I haven't had God release me from that. Yeah. And he was right. God gave him great favor. He launched his church. And he had all of his money, Adam, all of his money he needed for year one and year two. It was either pledged or in the bank. So he had no financial worries.
Right.
He texted me in November and he's like, hey, so we didn't have a really good weekend in the offering. I was like, what do you mean? And he texted me and it was a $sign and a 1 and a 1. And I was like, hey, that didn't come all the way through. I just got $1. He said, no, that was it. So I picked up the phone and called him. He was fretting and worried. And I was like, hey, bro, wait a second. Do you have money worries? No, not really. Don't you have everything you need? Yeah. Okay, so here's what I'm telling you. Now, by the way, this is a new record low. I don't know anybody will ever break the record of $11 on a weekend. I don't even know how you do that. That's right. But another conversation altogether. But here's the thing. That's why we do it the way we do, because you don't have to worry.
Right.
And I said, by the way, maybe that means we had a room full of unchurched people who don't know how to give, and we just need to celebrate that.
Right.
But and he's like, man, that's why I called you. Thank you for reminding me. So the model takes that into account. So 9 months, 2 years. So thinking this is 9, 6, 9.
Yep.
Okay. So 3 months before you launch your church, we're going to wrap up fundraising, but now we're going to talk about how are you going to disciple your people in the area of money and possessions?
Yeah.
And what you're going to do, Pastor, is on that first Sunday, this is why I love coaching church planners, because I got a clean palate.
That's right.
On that first Sunday, you are going to do the boldest, most compelling giving moment that you've ever done.
Right.
And you're going to say, we are going to be a generous church. We're going to talk about this every week. It's going to be open. It's going to be a conversation about spiritual growth. And just so you know, we've already got what we need for the first 2 years. That's not a story. That is truth.
Right.
I don't need your money, but I want you to be developed as a Christ follower. We're going to use Philippians 4:17 as our basis for that.
Yep.
And that's going to help you as you move from your pre-launch funding to self-sufficiency. So we spend 6 months framing that as what I call generosity from day one.
Yeah.
From day one.
Yes.
Then what we begin talking about is what does it look like to develop your congregation and your financial plan so that you can become self-sufficient. That's the last 9 months.
Yep.
While we're still keeping an eye on the other things, but that's the last 9 months.
Yeah, I love that you from day one you're talking about this, and the idea of like my giving moment isn't just another kind of fundraising pitch cloaked in before the offering is taken. No. It's a give in response to the gospel, discipleship, heart thing. Yeah. And so I think some pastors feel like they need to get up and like sell their congregation on the vision of the church again. And it's like, no, draw their heart to Jesus. Yeah,
that's right.
And then tell them this is one of the ways Jesus is going to shape your heart in that thing. And if you do the fundraising outside well, then you're free to do that.
So free. That's what I love about it. Right. So this guy, he was able to do that. He did great offering moments every month, and now he's self-sustaining. Yeah. No issues. He is the good restaurant that had enough capital to wait until the customers who were coming were sufficiently en masse and came back often enough that he can pay his bills.
Yeah. And I think it also gives you freedom as a pastor to have conversations like I'm not really sure if this person's on board or not, or maybe they get upset that you talk about money, and you can engage it. And then if they leave, I mean, you don't want them to leave, but you're not trying to keep them, so you're soft pedaling the money side of it.
Yeah, that's
because
right.
if you did this work well, then you can actually be a true shepherd, you know, and so, I
And we
think
set it up from day one as a discipleship issue for the congregation, as a shepherding issue for the pastor and for the pastoral team. And so we're just like, hey, if that's going to make you feel weird, first of all, we'd ask you to stay with us for a few weeks, but if you can't handle it, we're not going to change, because we're going to be about this. And maybe you've been in a place where it wasn't handled well. We are going to handle it well, because that's what you know. That's what you know, Adam. You've got people who've been bruised and battered, and people who've been in churches that have had, you know, financial improprieties, or they've heard of a church that did that, or all the other messy things that people do out there. You and I both know that those people end up in our congregations, even when we're healthy, even when we're a church plant. And so you've got to deal with the issue, and you've got to undo some of the hurt, pain, and baggage that they're carrying as they come into your midst. Yeah,
and if you do it well, from budgeting to financial accountability to all this sort of stuff, those people that have been busted and bruised, that's really healing for them.
Very healing. Very healing.
It shows them like you can be trusted, the church can be trusted, and therefore Christ can be trusted.
Totally.
And so it's incredibly important. And I think even then, if you get to the point, let's say, where it's like, okay, now we need a bigger infusion of money because we need a building, or something comes along like that, you've built the trust over years with your people where they know you don't just stand up and ask for money when you're trying to get something from them.
That's right.
And they see it.
That's right.
Yeah.
And you're not, you know, the other thing, Adam, is and I'm all for it. It is about giving to my church, the things that my church is doing. The for giving from is from my heart. The to piece is not unimportant.
Right.
It just can't be the main thing all the time. Your church, you do need to know that your church is stewarding it well and doing great gospel impact and doing all these things. But here's the thing. You can't let that go so far that all you're ever doing is trying to raise this up and say, see what this is, give to this. Because all you're doing is trying to compete with the nonprofits that are not a church.
Right. Right.
And they've always got a better call to action than you do.
And you will wear yourself and the people out on that. Like, you'll get tired of talking about it. And eventually it just won't be compelling to hear rah, 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 rah all the time. Eventually somebody's just going to go, another rah, rah speech.
Yeah.
And
it's
so,
kind of like, so this is kind of the favorite one. This comes up a fair amount. And when I hear it, I always have another way of thinking through it. It's like, yeah, you know, Jim, so we've got to add some office space on, and we're going to reduce our mortgage, and that's not the most sexy thing we can do. And it was like, da-da-da, and I was like, well, I just don't know how we're going to motivate our givers. And I lived to listen to all this, and I'm just sitting there, and I was like, you know, Pastor, I think you got a problem. I said, because if you're going to have the conversation in that way, I think that's going to be really hard for you. And they look at me, it's like, hey, I thought we were here for,
that's right.
Here to help us,
a little
right?
hope.
I said, I wouldn't do it that way.
Right.
I think the sexiest thing you can do, if we're talking about sexy, is talking about how great the mission and ministry of your church will be if you can take care of these things and get them out of the way.
Yeah.
And that's about as sexy as it gets, man, because it's not about, it doesn't have to be shiny. Sometimes just the persistence over a long period of time in pursuing obedience to God's direction for the church, that might be the sexiest thing you can do in front of a congregation, if we're trying to make it that way.
Who doesn't love freedom?
Who doesn't love that?
And
right?
the borrower slave to the lender.
Who doesn't like, I love the bank and that it allowed us to build a building we couldn't afford at a time. It's time for them to go away so that money can go to ministry.
Right.
Wait, is that the way we get to do that? Yeah, Pastor, that's a really good avenue.
Yeah.
People love that. And by the way, younger givers love that too.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
that's great.
It's fun kind of helping them think through that.
Well, Jim, thanks so much for sitting down and talking about this. I love the time we get to spend together, and thank you for those 35 years ago answering God's call to step into this and not into full-time vocational pastoral ministry.
And I could have grown a church from 500 to 250 so fast that that's probably why God didn't want me over there. He knew my giftedness was better over here.
But you, your team, Frank, Julie, others, man, you have had such a huge impact on so many churches, church plants, and I'm grateful for the way that you've led. And now maybe we can get back together and talk a little bit more about leadership transitions and things like that, because you've handed off some leadership to Frank and those things. So
yeah, I didn't know it when it started, Adam, but this is my vocational legacy now. It's the thing I'm leaving behind, and I want to leave it behind to do more after I left than when I was on watch, and that's all we're trying to figure out around here. So thank you for the kind words.
Well, man, thanks.
It's an honor to be here today.
Thanks for the time. Thanks for letting me come and come into your house and talk about this.
Welcome.
So appreciate it.
Thank you, bro.
Thanks, man.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of the Acts 29 podcast. If you want to connect with Acts 29 or find out more about planting a church with Acts 29, you can go to acts29.com. Go ahead and hit like on the podcast, and don't forget to subscribe so that you don't miss an episode. Thanks again for joining us.
Hey guys, just wanted to let everybody know that we are taking a little time from our regular posting of episodes for the Acts 29 podcast this summer. And what we're going to be doing is we'll be back in the fall with the next season of podcasts. So we'll miss you, but we're going to be recording over the summer a bunch of episodes, and then those will begin to release in the fall. So just wanted to let you know what was happening, and have a great summer. Pray that you get some rest and some good time with your family, and we'll see you in the fall.